Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're listening to this and you're trying to understand a medical diagnosis, there's usually this baseline expectation of precision.
Right. Yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. If you fall and break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line in the bone, and the doctor just points to the film and says, there it is. It's visible. It's categorical.
And that provides a sense of comfort, really. I mean, the human brain craves that kind of binary reality. A bone is either fractured or it is intact.
Yeah.
The path to healing, or at least, the path to a cast, is laid out clearly right in front of you.
But when you step into the world of institutional trauma, and specifically the kind of psychological and, spiritual friction we're looking at today, that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
Oh, totally.
You're suddenly navigating a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. You just can't point to a white line on a film.
Because the fractures we're dealing with aren't in calcium and marrow. I mean, they're in the psyche. They exist in the conscience. And in that very fabric of trust that binds a human being to an organization that claims to speak for the divine.
Right.
And tracing the exact point of that fracture requires a completely different kind of forensic analysis.
Which brings us directly to our focus.
I swore I'd leave this town. Funny how it never left me. Life looks different in a back row rear view. Things I thought I wanted, some I did, some I outgrew. Count my blessings on the center line.
In our previous episode, we explored the remarkable story of Father Vladimir Felsman, whose experience raised serious questions about the relationship between personal conscience, the sacrament of reconciliation, and institutional loyalty inside Opus Dei.
Right. And if you're joining us from that previous discussion, the vital piece of context to carry forward is that Vladimir's story was not about a man losing his faith.
No, not at all.
I cannot stress that enough. It was fundamentally the opposite. It was a story about remaining fiercely faithful to his own conscience in a moment when the expectations of the institution appeared to be, in direct conflict with fundamental Catholic tradition.
Yeah. Now, you might already be sensing some profound similarities between his story and the terrain we are about to cover today, especially when it comes to how a powerful institution reacts when it feels threatened.
Yeah, how it protects its internal ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I want to set a boundary for us right up front. We're actually going to hold off on the deeper theological and canonical parallels for now. That incredibly complex intersection of internal secrecy, spiritual direction, and canon law, that's going to be the central topic of next week.
We really have to pace the analysis here. I mean, the human element, the actual lived experience on the ground, requires our full, undivided attention first.
Yeah. Otherwise, we get lost in the weeds.
Right. If we jump straight into canon law, we lose the visceral reality of what these individuals actually lived through.
So today, we're shifting the lens. We're looking at another perspective on this exact underlying friction, the collision between an individual's conscience and an institution's drive for self-preservation. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the story of María Angustias Moreno. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore her unprecedented decision to publish her experiences as a former female member in Spain and to unpack the extraordinary, almost unbelievable lengths the institution went to in order to suppress her credibility.
And the source material we're working with is just an invaluable historical document. We're analyzing a book titled La Otra Cara del Opus Dei, which translates to The Other Face of Opus Dei.
Right.
Published in 1978, it is a meticulous, really forensic documentation of the intense backlash and the highly coordinated smear campaign that Maria faced after she published her very first testimonial book, which was called Anexo a una Historia, or Annex to a History.
Yeah, and to really grasp the magnitude of the earthquake that her first book caused, we have to map out the fault lines. We need to understand who María Angustias Moreno actually was.
Absolutely.
And why her decision to just put ink to paper sent such massive shockwaves through the status quo of 1970s Spain. So I want to start with her actual status within the organization, because she wasn't just, a casual attendee of weekend retreats.
Oh, far from it. Maria spent years inside Opus Dei as a numerary. And for those unfamiliar with the internal taxonomy of the group, a numerary is the most committed tier of membership.
Right. The core.
Exactly. These are individuals who commit to apostolic celibacy. They live in centers run by the organization. They literally hand over their professional incomes to the institution.
Wow.
Yeah, their time, their reading material, their social interactions, their spiritual lives. Everything is heavily regulated by the directors. It's this all-encompassing 24/7 existential commitment.
So when someone in that position decides to leave, it isn't like canceling a gym membership.
Right.
Or even, switching parishes. It is a complete dismantling of an entire life. But what really strikes me in her writing is her motivation. She states very clearly that she didn't leave with the intention of destroying the organization.
No, it wasn't a vendetta.
Exactly. She left because she reached a point where the institution just felt equivocal to her. She felt a moral duty to the truth, and writing was an act of conscience.
And the source text reveals this fascinating dynamic about her departure. When she communicated her realization that the internal reality contradicted the stated ideals, the institution didn't just open the door and say, okay, accept your resignation.
Right. They didn't just let her walk away.
No, they actively, aggressively tried to retain her. The book details how directors were actually dispatched from Madrid down to Sevilla specifically to intercept her exit.
The way she describes it, they basically offered her a menu of accommodations. They asked her what city she wanted to live in, what kind of job she wanted to do.
Yeah, it's wild.
I'm trying to picture this. It feels remarkably similar to a scenario where an executive realizes a corporation's core mission is fundamentally toxic. They hand in their resignation, and suddenly HR just swoops in panic mode.
Yeah, damage control.
Right. They offer a corner office, a massive retention bonus, a transfer to the Paris branch, anything to buy silence and keep the person inside the tent.
But to push that corporate analogy further, imagine if that HR department didn't just offer you a corner office, but simultaneously communicated that leaving the company meant you were fundamentally betraying God.
Oh, wow.
And risking your eternal soul. That is the dual pressure at play here. But Maria refused all the accommodations. She notes that she didn't join to find a, quote, comfortable setup.
Yeah.
She joined for a spiritual ideal. And when that ideal proved to be compromised, no amount of institutional bribery, whether it was material comfort or altered living arrangements, could patch that fundamental lack of coherence. She wanted truth, not an arrangement.
So she walks away. And crucially, she does not walk away quietly. In 1976, she publishes Anexo a una historia. And to understand why this was akin to throwing a bomb into a serene pond, we have to situate ourselves in the historical and cultural context of Spain in 1976.
Context is everything here, because Francisco Franco, the dictator who ruled Spain for decades, died in late 1975.
Right.
So 1976 is year one of this very fragile, incredibly tense transition to democracy. And during the dictatorship, the Catholic Church, and Opus Dei in particular, held immense intertwined cultural, political, and economic power.
They were deeply embedded.
Exactly. Opus Dei technocrats had practically run the Spanish economy in the 1960s. The organization thrived on this aura of pristine holiness, elite influence, and above all, absolute discretion.
There was just an ironclad veil of internal secrecy. And Maria, as a woman, as a former numerary, she just takes a scalpel to that veil.
She really does.
Her first book was one of the very first public testimonies by a former female member in the entire country. She starts describing what she calls the complicated intricacies of the group.
And her language is deeply analytical, but totally unsparing. She doesn't just say, I had a bad time. She diagnoses the internal culture. She uses phrases like authoritarianism taken to personality-destroying extremes.
Yeah, that's heavy.
She outlines how the members were systematically conditioned.
And she also uses the phrase idolatrous cult regarding the founder, José María Escrivá. I mean, that is an incredibly heavy accusation to level against a group that positions itself as the vanguard of Orthodox Catholicism.
Well, she argued that the conditioning inside the centers equated the will of the founder exactly with the will of God.
Oh, I see.
So if the founder said a wall should be painted blue, it wasn't just an architectural preference, it was a divine mandate. If a director gave an order, questioning that order was framed as a failure of faith, like a temptation from the devil.
Right.
And that leaves absolutely no room for an adult Catholic conscience to discern, to question, or to think critically.
But if the environment was as suffocating as she describes, I find myself wondering about the timeline. Because she wasn't the first person to leave. Thousands of people had cycled through those doors. Why did it take until 1976 for a voice like hers to break through the silence?
That is a critical question, and Maria addresses the psychological barrier of speaking out directly. The silence of former members isn't a coincidence. It is a very predictable byproduct of the exit process.
How so?
First, there is sheer physiological and emotional exhaustion. When you leave an institution that has controlled your schedule down to the minute for years, you are depleted. You don't have the energy to write a book. You barely have the energy to figure out how to live in the secular world.
You're just learning how to breathe outside the submarine.
Precisely. Second, she details the severe psychological deterioration, the mental gymnastics required to survive cognitive dissonance, where what you're told you're doing conflicts with what you actually experience. It leaves people deeply fragmented. It takes years of quiet rebuilding just to recover a basic sense of self. And third, there is the social terror. Speaking out in 1970s Spain against an organization with that much reach. It meant risking your career prospects, your social safety net, and your standing in the broader Catholic community.
Yeah, so it was incredibly dangerous.
Breaking that silence was an act of profound, calculated bravery. She knew she was stepping out into the cold.
But the fascinating turn in this history is that she didn't stay out in the cold alone for very long. When her book drops, the institution's initial reaction is, standard damage control. They boycott it.
Right.
They lean on their networks to pressure bookstores to pull it from the display windows. They try to quietly suffocate the oxygen out of the publication. But then a massive variable enters the equation, a spark.
And from the perspective of an institution trying to control a narrative, it was the most dangerous kind of spark imaginable.
In early 1977, a public letter is printed in the Diario de Barcelona. Now, the Diario wasn't some fringe newsletter. It was a major, respected publication. And this letter wasn't an anonymous, vague rant. It was signed by over 20 former members.
Yeah, real people.
These were women from major cities across Spain: Barcelona, Madrid, Cordoba, Sevilla. The signatories included journalists and intellectuals. They attached their real names and their professional reputations to this letter.
And we have excerpts of the letter documented in Maria's second book. Analyzing the text of it is really crucial. It isn't just a generic, we support freedom of speech letter.
Right.
It is a masterpiece of specific, targeted solidarity. They publicly state that they have read Anexo a una Historia, and they are utilizing the newspaper's platform to applaud the author and validate the text.
I actually want to read a piece of it directly from the source material.
Go for it.
The women wrote, "Applause because, for the first time, and it was about time, a woman who belonged to Opus Dei narrates with great simplicity and undeniable sincerity the complicated intricacies of this association." And they go on to explicitly validate her claims about the authoritarianism and the integrism that she described.
But the most devastating sentence in that letter, the one that I believe triggered everything that followed, is this. Many are those who have suspected these defining traits of Opus Dei, but now they can verify their evidence in 1,001 details that the author narrates and that we corroborate with our own experience.
We corroborate with our own experience. That is the linchpin. But I want to push on this for a second. The institution was already suffocating the book. They had the bookstore connections. Why did a single letter to the editor in Barcelona cause them to completely escalate their tactics? I mean, newspapers publish letters every day. Why didn't they just ignore it?
Because of the mechanics of institutional power and narrative control, there is a vast, unbridgeable difference between one isolated critic and a coordinated public network of corroborators.
Okay, I see.
When Maria was just one woman writing a book, the institution's public relations apparatus could easily isolate her. They could deploy the standard tropes. She is a disgruntled ex-member. She couldn't handle the spiritual rigor. She has a personal vendetta. They can frame her as an anomaly.
Right, like a localized infection. They can just quarantine and dismiss.
Exactly. But the letter fundamentally alters the geometry of the threat. It transforms her solitary voice into a collective chorus. You can tell your members that one woman is bitter and lying. You cannot easily explain away 24 educated professional women geographically dispersed across the entire country who are stepping into the public square and saying, "We were in those centers too, we lived those routines, and everything she wrote is factually accurate."
Wow. Yeah, that's much harder to spin.
A collective implies a systemic, structural truth. It bypasses the disgruntled individual defense entirely.
So the directors sitting in their headquarters realize the quarantine has failed. They're actively losing the narrative. And this brings us to the most shocking revelation documented in the source text. The institution decides to launch a counteroffensive. But it's not a press release. It's not a counterbook. It's a series of coordinated physical visits.
And this is the juncture where the historical record begins to read like a psychological thriller. The logistics alone are staggering.
I want you to picture the map of Spain in April 1977. Within a single, condensed week, 6 Opus Dei priests are mobilized. They are dispatched directly to the private homes and offices of the women who signed that newspaper letter.
Yeah.
They travel in pairs. 2 are operating in Madrid, 2 are sweeping through Barcelona, and 2 are sent down to the Andalusia region.
It is effectively a military-style deployment, but the foot soldiers are clergy.
I'm struggling to even process the logistics of this. 6 priests don't just, happen to wake up on the same Tuesday in 3 different time zones or regions and independently decide to visit these specific women in pairs. That requires a central dispatcher.
Absolutely.
It requires dossiers. It requires an itinerary. It's like a political campaign where the opposition research team coordinates a massive whisper campaign right before an election day.
That's a really good comparison.
But the analogy fails because these aren't political fixers in cheap suits making late-night phone calls. These are men wearing the cloth. They are leveraging their sacramental authority, their identity as Catholic priests, to execute a coordinated smear campaign against laywomen.
And Maria provides a piercing analysis of this exact tactic in her writing. She diagnoses this not as a momentary lapse in judgment, but as a systemic methodology. She writes that Opus Dei utilizes discredit as a defense style. Think about the strategic logic. If the institution cannot logically or factually refute the message, because the book accurately describes their internal practices, the only remaining defensive maneuver is to obliterate the messenger.
Because if the messenger is ruined, the message doesn't matter.
Exactly. If the messenger is perceived as morally bankrupt, the message is automatically invalidated in the eyes of the faithful.
Desprestigio como estilo de defensa. Discredit as a style of defense. But how did this actually play out in the living rooms and offices? The source text meticulously documents the testimonies of the women who received these visits. So let's look at the first major encounter in Madrid, the visit to a woman identified as B.E.
Right. The account of B.E. is incredibly revealing because it exposes the dual tactics of bribery and intimidation. B.E. was a former member who had left the organization 7 years prior.
7 years, okay.
And her exit had been fraught, particularly concerning unresolved financial disputes with the institution. For 7 years, she hears absolutely nothing from them. Then, out of nowhere, her phone rings. It's Don Emilio Navarro asking for an urgent in-person meeting. He arrives at her apartment accompanied by another priest, Don Juan Garcia Lovett.
But B.E. isn't naive. She immediately anticipates that this sudden pastoral interest is a trap. So she orchestrates a countermeasure. She has her friend, identified in the text only as I, hide in the adjacent room.
Yeah, that part is amazing.
She leaves the door cracked just enough so the friend can hear every word spoken in the living room.
It is an incredible moment of foresight. The priests sit down and, well, they dispense with the pleasantries fairly quickly. They explicitly state the purpose of their visit, María Angustias Moreno. They tell B.E. that by publicly associating with Maria, she's putting herself in moral danger.
And what's their reasoning?
Because, and this is their explicit accusation, they claim Maria is a sexual deviant and a lesbian.
They just don't mince words at all. They say she is completely corrupted. B.E. pushes back, demanding proof. She wants to know how they can make such an explosive claim. And Don Emilio claims they have an unbroken chain of evidence.
Right.
He says they have proof of her deviancy from before she joined the institution, while she was inside, and after she left. But critically, they produce zero actual documentation to back this up.
And this is where we see the psychological manipulation pivot. B.E. stands her ground. She tells the priests that the book is true to her lived experience, and she absolutely will not retract her signature from the public letter.
Good for her.
Yeah, and when intimidation fails, the priests switch to the carrot. They suddenly, miraculously, bring up B.E.'s old financial grievances, the very issues they had ignored for nearly a decade.
The timing is just unbelievable.
It is entirely transactional. Don Juan Garcia Lovett looks at her and says, "We will fix your personal problem with absolute certainty. We repeat that we are at your disposal at any time to do it. If it isn't so, I will hang up this cassock."
Let's just pause and look at what is happening here. They are offering to solve her material, financial problems if she aligns with them and turns against Maria, while simultaneously threatening her with the social taint of associating with someone corrupted.
Yeah.
It is the most blatant carrot and stick approach imaginable.
But the priests are unaware of the fatal flaw in their operation. The friend in the next room,
Oh, right.
BE, having heard enough, eventually calls her friend I out into the living room. And the reaction of the priest is so telling. They don't stand by their righteous defense of truth. They immediately shut down.
Oh, wow.
They become furious, protesting that the conversation was strictly meant to be a private, internal matter. They physically get up and abandon the visit. A smear campaign, by its very nature, can only survive in the shadows. The moment an independent, uncompromised witness is introduced, the power dynamic entirely collapses.
That happened in Madrid. But the visit that took place in Barcelona is, if anything, even more intense. Let's look at the encounter with a woman named AMC. She is at her place of business. She receives a call from Don Benito Bedrinas and Don Severino Majoga. Like BE, AMC is highly suspicious of this sudden pastoral visit. Our countermeasure is even more definitive. She secretly sets up a tape recorder on her office desk.
And the resulting transcript is a masterclass in exposing semantic evasion. The priests walk into her office and initiate the exact same script used in Madrid. It confirms the central coordination.
Right.
They tell AMC that Maria hasn't lived chastity well, insinuating heavily that she has engaged in same-sex relations. AMC, clearly unafraid, looks at them and directly asks, "Do you have proof?" Don Severino confidently replies, "There is quite abundant documentation."
Abundant documentation. But AMC corners them. She doesn't just ask to see the files. She leverages their own spiritual identity against them. She says to them, "I ask you as priests to commit yourselves under your word before God that what you just told me about María Angustias Moreno is true."
The tension in that room must have been suffocating. She is invoking their deepest vows. She is asking them to snake the validity of their priesthood. They're standing before the divine on this specific accusation of sexual deviancy.
Right.
And the tape recording captures the exact moment their confidence shatters. Initially, Don Benito Badrinas mutters a nervous, barely audible yes, but AMC presses them to formalize it, to swear an oath right there in the office.
And what happens? They completely lose their composure.
They start talking over each other. The confident accusers suddenly become incredibly nervous men backtracking rapidly. They deploy a frantic semantic dodge. They claim they aren't making an accusation. They are merely trying to inform her privately.
We're not accusing, we're just informing.
Oh.
That is such a hollow defense. If you possess abundant documentation of a truth, or the profound terror at swearing to it before God, it seems blatantly obvious that the documentation doesn't exist. The narrative was manufactured in a boardroom to instill disgust and fear, with the sole hope that the listener would be so repulsed they would quietly withdraw their name from the public sphere.
And the campaign wasn't limited to former members either. The source text documents that the institution crossed another massive boundary. They went after Maria's own family.
Yes, two different priests, Don Ernesto Peñacoba and Don Antonio del Valls, are dispatched to visit Maria's mother and her brother, Rafael.
You can imagine the outrage of a family facing this. The mother, operating from a place of traditional Catholic understanding, demands to know how priests, whose sacramental mission is to hear confessions, to offer absolution, to guide souls to grace, can dedicate their time to crisscrossing the country as organized agents of defamation.
And the brother, Rafael, strips the situation down to its absolute moral core. He confronts the priest with a philosophical trap. He asks if he genuinely believes that, in the name of God, for the sake of saving or defending a religious institution, it is permissible to use slander.
And the response from the priest is perhaps the most chilling detail in the entire book.
He shrugs, and he says, "Depende." It depends.
Depende.
I really want us to sit with that word for a second. It depends. How does a man who has dedicated his life to the gospel, a man who stands at an altar and consecrates the Eucharist, look a family member in the eye and say that the morality of slander is situational? How does a priest justify a coordinated smear campaign?
To understand that depende, you have to delve deep into the psychology of high-control institutional environments. Maria doesn't just present these priests as cartoon villains. She offers a nuanced systemic diagnosis.
Okay.
She suggests that these men are, in a very real and tragic sense, victims of their own conditioning. She uses the term mentalization. Inside this specific framework, the preservation of the organization, the expansion of its influence, and the defense of the founder's pristine legacy are elevated to the absolute highest moral good conceivable.
So they undergo a psychological merging where the institution becomes perfectly synonymous with the will of God.
Exactly. And once that mental merge occurs, the entire landscape of moral calculus is altered. If Opus Dei is exactly what God wants, then anything that threatens Opus Dei threatens God himself. Therefore, the survival of the institution justifies almost any defensive measure.
Wow.
The end justifies the means isn't just a cynical political strategy, it becomes an acceptable, even necessary, theological stance. If lying, manipulation, or slander are deployed to protect the divine structure from an attacker, those actions cease to be categorized as sins. They are reframed as acts of holy defense.
If you're listening to this, consider the terrifying implications of that logic. If the institution's survival is the ultimate good, there is no floor. There is no ethical boundary you cannot rationalize crossing. If slander is acceptable, what isn't?
Furthermore, we have to factor in the vow of absolute obedience. Maria points out the obvious. 6 adult men don't organically decide to travel across Spain in pairs with matching talking points.
Right, this was planned.
This was an executed order from the hierarchy. In a structure where obeying your director is taught as the literal equivalent of obeying God, the individual conscience is entirely bypassed. You don't evaluate the morality of the order, you evaluate your compliance to it. The priest saying, depende, is reflecting a system that has outsourced moral reasoning to the directors.
I want to shift our focus slightly to the specific weapon they selected for this operation. Because they had options. They could have accused her of embezzling center funds, they could have accused her of theological heresy or losing her mind, but they didn't.
No.
They went straight for a very specific, intimate smear. They accused her of homosexuality, they repeatedly called her a lesbian and a sexual deviant. We need to contextualize why that specific weapon was chosen.
It was a highly calculated, highly lethal choice. Remember the era? Spain in the late 1970s. The culture is still deeply steeped in conservative, post-dictatorship Catholicism. In that specific sociological atmosphere, an accusation of homosexuality, especially against an unmarried woman who had previously taken vows of celibacy, was not just a slight insult, it was a social execution.
It was designed to completely obliterate her credibility.
It was intended to evoke visceral disgust among the conservative Catholic demographic that made up Opus Dei's power base. The goal was to render her socially radioactive, ensuring that no respectable Catholic would dare read her book or associate with her, lest they be tainted by the association.
And the hypocrisy of this approach is just staggering. Maria points out a glaring contradiction in the institution's sudden interest in these women. For years after these women left the centers, the institution ignored them completely.
Completely.
The source text notes that some of the women who signed that newspaper letter were facing severe, tangible hardships. One woman was living in poverty, another had a severely ill child requiring multiple surgeries, another had a brother who was paralyzed at the age of 30, leaving 5 children to care for.
And yet, despite its immense global wealth, its vast network of influential members, and its stated commitment to Christian charity, Opus Dei never once dispatched a priest to knock on those doors. They never offered a loaf of bread, a peseta for medical bills, or even a prayer of comfort.
But the very second these women publicly validate a book that critiques the institution's power structure, suddenly pairs of priests are appearing at their offices and apartments, claiming they are there out of deep pastoral concern for the salvation of their souls and their moral purity.
It is the ultimate weaponization of morality. They use the aesthetic of pastoral care, the cassock, the solemn tone, the language of spiritual concern, to deliver a targeted assassination of character.
Maria actually draws a biblical parallel in her analysis of this behavior, and it is razor sharp. She compares the institutional directors to the Pharisees of the New Testament.
It is a profound theological critique. If we look at the Gospels, Christ's most intense recurring conflict was not with the occupying Roman Empire. His fury was reserved for the Pharisees, the religious elite who prioritized legalistic purity, institutional tradition, and their own societal power over actual justice, mercy, and truth.
She uses the exact phrase from the Gospel of Matthew, sepulchros blanquados, beautiful and pristine on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones and decay.
Yeah.
By using this metaphor, she is dismantling their actions using their own theological framework. She is effectively saying, you claim to represent the purest form of Christianity, but when your power is challenged, you operate with the exact same ruthless self-preservation as the men who orchestrated the crucifixion to protect their religious system.
And the core argument she builds is that true faith, if it is actually rooted in the divine, does not require a bodyguard of lives to survive. If Opus Dei is truly a work of God, as its name translates, it should possess the spiritual resilience to withstand a critical book by a former member.
Right. The truth defends itself.
Exactly. A healthy institution, when faced with an allegation of authoritarianism, engages with the substance of the critique. It looks inward. It asks, are our governance structures too rigid?
But silencing the critic sidesteps the substance entirely. It is a tacit admission that the critique is too dangerous to debate on its merits.
Precisely. Attacking the person is an admission of profound institutional vulnerability.
So, faced with this massive, coordinated smear campaign, Maria has a choice. She could retreat into silence, which is what the institution wanted. She could write another angry essay, but she chooses a different path. She decides to fight them on a battlefield where facts are supposed to matter. She takes them to the Spanish legal system.
She initiates a legal mechanism known in Spain as an acto de conciliación, or an act of conciliation.
Wait, let's pause there for the listener because the legal framework is important. An act of conciliation isn't just a cease and desist letter written on nice stationery, right?
Correct. In the Spanish Civil Code, an act of conciliation is a formal, mandatory prerequisite step before you can file a full-blown criminal or civil lawsuit for slander and injury. It is a mechanism designed to avoid clogging the courts. You essentially summon the offending parties before a judge, present your grievances, and offer them a chance to admit wrongdoing and settle the matter before a formal trial begins.
And what I find so compelling about her approach is her demand. She explicitly states in the legal filing that she does not want a single peseta. She wasn't seeking a financial windfall.
Not at all.
She drafted a highly specific 9-point document detailing exactly what these 6 priests had done. She documented the dates, the cities, the specific false imputations of sexual deviancy, and the fact that they knew about her book. Her only demand was that they formally, legally, and publicly retract the lies. She wanted her name and her reputation restored.
She hires Don Jose Maria Gil Robles, a highly prominent, respected lawyer, to represent her. The summons are issued. The legal machinery begins to grind.
So what does the institution do? They claim to have abundant documentation of her deviancy in AMC's office. Do they bravely march into the courthouse, present their dossiers to the judge, and stand by their righteous defense of the truth?
Not even close. The moment the threat of public legal scrutiny becomes real, the institution's lawyers initiate a frantic campaign of backchanneling.
Wow.
The lawyer representing the Opus Dei priests, a man named Ramon Mascalvet, who, importantly, was also a numerary member of Opus Dei, bypasses the formal legal avenues entirely. He starts showing up personally at the private home of Maria's lawyer, Gil Robles.
He goes to his house on a Sunday.
Exactly. They are desperate to keep this out of a public courtroom. Mascalvet immediately tries to negotiate a private settlement. He offers a private, quiet apology, allegedly stating that the priests would get on their knees to apologize if that's what it took.
Really?
Yeah. And when that doesn't work, they attempt a classic institutional defense maneuver. They offer up a scapegoat.
Explain the mechanics of that. How does an organization like this generate a scapegoat so easily?
It goes back to that concept of absolute obedience and institutional preservation we discussed earlier. The lawyers offer to have just one single priest, Don Juan Garcia Lovet, take the entirety of the legal blame. They try to spin a narrative that he acted alone as a rogue agent and that the other 5 priests were merely following his misguided instructions.
Oh, that's incredibly convenient.
They are entirely willing to sacrifice one of their own regional directors to let him fall on his sword if it means insulating the broader corporate entity of Opus Dei from legal and public liability.
Protect the brand, sacrifice the individual. But Maria refuses the scapegoat. She knows perfectly well that one rogue priest doesn't accidentally organize a synchronized multi-city deployment. So when she holds firm, what is their final desperate play?
They revert to the only language institutional power truly understands: capital. They begin hinting at a massive financial payout to make the problem disappear. They talk to her lawyer about the millions you want.
They assume everyone has a price. They try to buy your silence just like they tried to buy it with a comfortable living arrangement when she first tried to leave.
Because in their operational paradigm, everything is a transaction that can be managed. But Maria rejects the money. She reiterates that it is a matter of simple reparation of the truth. She wants the retraction on the record.
So she has the moral high ground. She refuses the bribes. She has the sworn testimonies from the women in Madrid and Andalusia. She literally has AMC's magnetic tape recording of the priests dodging an oath in Barcelona. Seems like an airtight case. But the case collapses. It never goes to trial. Why?
The source text becomes somewhat opaque in its description of the final legal demise, but it points to a very dark, very pragmatic reality about power. Maria notes that intense pressures were brought to bear.
Pressures.
Yeah. Eventually, her high-profile lawyer steps back from the aggressive pursuit of the case. The legal timeline is dragged out, stalled, and obfuscated until the case reaches its prescription date, meaning the statute of limitations expires without any judicial resolution.
They ran out the clock.
Exactly. And this analysis reveals a vital truth about the reach of powerful, well-resourced institutions. When an organization possesses immense financial reserves, deep-seated political and judicial connections, and an army of lawyers who view defending the institution not just as a job, but as a holy crusade, they don't necessarily have to win the argument in court.
No.
They just have to outlast, outfund, and outpressure the individual.
They could generate enough bureaucratic and social friction to grind the gears of justice to a complete halt. In a purely material legal sense, the institution won. They smothered the accountability process in the cradle.
But that material victory is precisely what birthed the book we are analyzing today. When Maria realized that the legal avenues were going to be permanently blocked by institutional pressure, she decided to lay the entire body of evidence out in the court of public opinion.
If the judge couldn't see it, everyone else would.
Exactly. If the judge wasn't allowed to see the transcripts, the Spanish public would. She published the letters, the testimonies of the women, the details of the back-channeling, everything. La otra cara del Opus Dei is the enduring monument to that suppressed legal battle.
Which brings us to the profound core of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
As we look at the totality of María Angustias Moreno's experience, what does her story reveal about the fundamental nature of testimony, especially when it challenges a monolithic power structure?
It reveals that the personal cost of speaking an uncomfortable truth is agonizingly high. When an individual stands up to challenge an institution, particularly a religious institution that has deeply entwined its own corporate survival with the will of God, the retaliation will be swift, it will be highly coordinated, and it will be ruthlessly personal.
Yeah.
The institution will not debate your ideas. They will target your morality, your sanity, and your social standing to neutralize you as a threat.
But simultaneously, her story is a testament to the indestructible nature of documented truth. They threw the entire arsenal at her. They deployed priests to smear her sexuality. They boycotted her income. They used legal maneuvering to deny her justice. Yet nearly 50 years later, we are sitting here reading her words.
That's powerful.
The testimonies of those women in Madrid and Barcelona survived. The institution could outlast the statute of limitations, but they couldn't erase the historical record she meticulously created.
If we step back and view organizations as living, breathing ecosystems, there is a fundamental lesson here about institutional health. An organization becomes resilient, healthy, and genuinely aligned with its ethical or spiritual mission only when criticism can be absorbed, heard, and integrated.
Right.
When an institution's default reflex is to viciously suppress any internal critique, it is building its house on sand.
A system that requires the mobilization of slander to protect its own reputation is a system that is fundamentally fragile on the inside.
An institution that is truly confident in its truth and secure in its divine mandate does not need to destroy the people who ask hard questions. It listens to them. It reflects. And if necessary, it reforms. The ultimate tragedy of this historical account isn't just the pain inflicted on Maria and her supporters. It is the deep spiritual rot that takes hold within an institution when its leaders convince themselves that God requires them to lie.
Whether one agrees with María Angustias Moreno's conclusions or not, her story reminds us that testimony matters, listening matters, and understanding matters.
It is the only way we can begin to map those murky diagnostic waters of institutional trauma we discussed at the very beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly intense historical and psychological journey today. Before we go, please remember to subscribe to the channel. We rely entirely on your support to keep doing this level of in-depth research.
Please like this deep dive. Share it with anyone you think needs to hear this story. Leave a comment with your thoughts on how modern institutions handle criticism, and follow our deep dives for all future updates.
And as for what's coming next, in our next episode, we'll return to the stories of Vladimir Felsman and María Angustias Moreno to explore a deeper question. What happens when spiritual authority begins serving institutional interests before serving the faithful?
It's going to be a complex and vital discussion.
Before we go, consider this. If an institution truly believes it speaks with the absolute voice of God, what happens to the very concept of objective truth when God's voice and the public relations department become the exact same thing? Think about that until next time. Keep asking questions.
My blessings on the center line, count my losses days in the past and pints if every wrong turn still somehow led me here to you. Guess I can't complain.